Hi, this is Mike Schneider from cardrunners.com. I'm going to be making a video today for Card Player TV. I'm a high stakes limit hold'em player, and in 2006 I won the Party Poker Million. This will be my first limit video done for Card Player TV, so I hope you enjoy it. And today I'm going to primarily try to focus on the topic of continuation bets, since that's something that a lot of limit hold'em players struggle with, specifically on the turn and river once they get called on the flop. But anyway, this table I just joined is playing very aggressively, and I like pocket eights here in the small blind when it's 4 bets to you. At rare spot where you'd be folding pocket eights pre-flop, but it's probably right. The only reason that you'd consider calling is specifically to try to spike a set, which I guess I just did here, and then hope you run up against other huge hands. Like, the ideal situation is at 8 high flop against an overpair or two. But anyway, hopefully we'll get a few situations where there'll be some dicey spots about whether to bet the turn or river after raising pre-flop and betting on the flop. But here, we'll just go ahead and play this hand out like it had been me that open raised from the button. And we'll say that, pretend like instead of an ace out here, well, never mind, well, let's wait till the next hand. Normally this would be a fold from the cutoff, but I'm going to play it in the interest of trying to get into more situations where perhaps we can talk about whether I should be betting on the turn or not. Alright, let's say in this hand I had a hand like ace-8 and I bet the flop and got called. Now the 7 on the turn I'd probably check behind just because you have more overcards than a king 6-5 flop, and if he check calls, it's just too likely that either the 7 hits him for a pair or he check called with a pair on the flop. Where you get more boards like maybe like 9-5-2 or something. If you have an ace-8, you would bet on the turn if the turn was a safe looking card that didn't really give you any additional outs. Reason for that would be because it's more likely that somebody might have a queen 10 or even pocket 3s that they might give up on the turn if you bet again. And then from the big blind here, when there's a raise and a cold caller, you could play almost any suited cards. Most connectors are good, and then some bigger one gappers like 9-7 or hands like those become playable for 1 bet once there are 2 opponents in the pot. And from the small blind against big blind, I recommend in most situations almost any hand that you are going to play you should open raise with. There's times when you don't do that, specifically if you're against a big blind player that 3 bets very, very lightly. Then you might limp some of your hands that you think are playable but aren't really showdownable. So if it'd be hands such as maybe like 8-6 or even like 10-7 offsuit maybe, and then of course if your opponent, you think that they might observe that you're playing that kind of way, then you might occasionally limp a ace-5 offsuit or even trap them with a big hand like aces or kings or something like that. Now as you get into higher stakes games in blind steal situations, like if on an ace-high flop, it becomes a lot more likely that people check call on the flop with nothing in hopes that they're going to try to steal the pot from you on either the turn or river, because a lot of times the action will go check, bet, call, and then the pre-flop raiser doesn't have anything, so then they check behind on the turn, and then the big blind or small blind or whoever bets on the river and the pre-flop raiser folds. So that's just one thing. If you're playing in a smaller stakes game, oftentimes if they call you on the flop, it's because they have a pair and they're showing down. But in a higher stakes game, it's a lot more likely that somebody's just calling just to see what you do on the turn. not too many playable hands here right now, but we'll try to make the most of it. And here at Costello did from the small blind, cold calling, cut off open raise. I wouldn't advise doing that too often ever. No, usually there's a lot more value in 3-betting to try to drive the big blind out, get the pot heads up against the raiser who might be opening lightly. Gives you a lot of opportunities too to basically bet the flop and they might fold if they totally missed, or it prevents you from being the one that check calls or check folds, and it just gives you enough momentum that you either win the pot just because you're the aggressor, or oftentimes enough you happen to stumble into a winning hand. Like betting, like let's say you have like a 10-9 suited and the flop came Queen 5-4 and you bet the flop. Now it turns a 9 and the 9 ends up winning you the pot. So here, because of the 2 clubs on the flop, I'm just going to check raise right away, because that's the reason for doing that is because that'll oftentimes maximize your profits against the ace high, who most online players, they see king 4 flop and you check raise. If they have ace high, they're going to assume that you have a club flush draw often enough that they're going to end up calling down. But if you check call the flop, ace high will check the turn most of the time, and then you don't win nearly as much money. Or also then there's hands like pocket 8s, pocket 10s, or even if he has like even a worse king, where not too many kings worse than king 9 in that spot, but it's just a way to control the pot size and to get the amount of bets that you'd like to get in post flop with your hand. Now, let's say that king 9 hand against Costello's open raise. Let's say the flop came king 8-7. You might also check raise that for the reason that he'll put you on a straight draw now, 10-9, 5-6, jack 10, whatever. So again, you might get light call downs. And also, 9's a really good straight blocker card in case it's him that has a jack 10 or whatever, because now you've got one of his outs and makes it even less likely that he somehow turns a winning hand against you. Now, conversely, say that the flop was 9 high. When you're going to decide if you're going to check call or check raise, it often will come down to what have I been doing lately against this opponent. So say you've had a couple times where you've check called the flop against him and then check folded on the turn. Now it'd become a lot more likely that when you flop your top pair there with a good kicker, you'll just check call again on the flop, because he's probably getting into a habit of seeing, hey, this guy plays weakly, I can just keep firing and he's going to fold. So then now you kind of hang him with the zone aggression. You can either check raise a turn, or depending on the turn card, you might just check call again. Or also then the reason for, if you, let's say, okay, you have check called him like 2 or 3 times in a row and folded on the turn. Now let's say that if you decide for whatever reason that you want to check raise with your king 9 instead of check calling, the reason for doing that is you hope if you get to show it down, ideally you want to show it down and win the pot. Then let's say you do that. Now he's noticed, alright, the guy 3 times in a row check called and check folded on the turn. Now this time he check raised on the flop and he had me beat. So now let's say 10 minutes later you get into another situation against this guy, or maybe against the button when you're in the big blind. Now let's say that you flopped a draw of some sort. You'd probably check raise this draw because you're hoping that they observe that you check folded 3 times with nothing, and now check raised the last time when you had top pair. Now they're going to remember you check raising the top pair. And even though you only have a draw this time, it's more likely that they're going to give you credit for having a made hand. And then they'll give it up more easily. Kind of hoping here we get some situations for me to go off of my initial topic that I wanted to talk about. If this hand, so I'm folding here, let's say one of the blinds defend. I'm going to play out this hand from J to Jack's perspective. Alright, now things changed. We'll play it from his perspective. Let's say I have ace king here. Queen 4-3 flop. Should you bet the turn? The guy calls with any kind of, like, it's likely, especially the 4 coming on the turn, that he might have an ace 10 or something. So now that spot, you should fire on the turn. Here, we'll raise this guy just to see if we can get into a situation. Maybe not. Things change with him 3-betting, although seems to be playing pretty aggressively pre-flop. So we'll just go with it. Here, let's pretend like you have ace-queen and you're this guy. Should you call down? I'd say, yeah, call the turn for sure, because now you got a pair. Now the river hits the flush. If he bets, I'd say you fold with your ace-queen. Reason for folding is because it looks like once you call the turn, you're calling the river. So if the guy's betting, he probably either has a king in his hand, which he's represented, or he just rivered a flush. So a lot of people will check down if, because the flop was like king 7 something. If they have like 8-7 suited or whatever, they'll probably check the river a lot of times, especially in small and medium stakes games. Yeah, my ace-9 raise was a little light against his under the gun limp, but it's about as low down as you want to go in isolating a limper in a 6-handed game. Unless if the limper plays really, really bad and you know he's like playing half of his hands, then you'd probably be isolating him with almost any ace, suited connectors, and a whole other variety of hands. But anyway, I'm going to call this video a wrap here, and if you like what you saw here, don't be afraid to check out more on cardrunners.com, because I make videos usually a couple times a month, limit hold'em videos, and we're slowly expanding to include more and more limit videos, and even get in some other limit games as time goes on. This is Mike Schneider making a video for Card Player TV. Thank you.